Or was he? I'm sure that many of you are furrowing your brows and are nodding in agreement. There's no smoke without fire, right? And these are just a fraction of the charges levied against King James. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. A man's reputation is at stake, but more importantly than that, so is the integrity of God's holy word in the King James Bible. So as Christians, we had better ensure that we have our facts straight before accusing a brother in Christ. Wouldn't you agree? Where spiritual matters are concerned, more important than examining the evidence put forth is the origin of the evidence. The importance of who and why supersede the importance of what. Evidence can be falsified, so the strength of the evidence hinges on the integrity of the ones making the accusations, the burden of proof, and all that jazz. No historical figure, other than Christ, has been more viciously and consistently maligned than King James. In this video, we're going to put his accusers on trial and examine the three most enduring accusations made against him. 1. His alleged involvement in Freemasonry. 2. His alleged obsession with witchcraft. 3. His alleged extramarital proclivities. Freemasonry lays claim to many prominent Scottish historical figures. The poet Robert Burns, the author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, first American President George Washington, and King George IV, just to name a few. In this official Masonic publication, though, one name is conspicuously absent. I'll give you 3 guesses. It's worth noting that the only record that corroborates the rumor of his initiation is found in these 2 hard-to-find publications. The document that they cite is called the Mutual Agreement or Mutual Contract of 1658 and is said to have been commissioned to preserve the lodge's history and establish its claims of precedence, including the claim that King James was initiated into the lodge in 1601. However, since the document wasn't completed until 1658, a mere 33 years after James's death in 1625, that means that the so-called oldest existing record of James' alleged affiliation with Freemasonry would have been written posthumously. I'm sure there's nothing remotely sinister about that or this mutual agreement of theirs. If you're still on the fence, meet Edward McBean, a 19th-century Masonic scholar. He was the junior warden of the Quatuor Coronati Lodge, which was founded in 1884 with the intention of replacing the, quote, imaginative writings of earlier Masonic authors with an evidence-based approach to Masonic history, and is today considered the premier lodge of Masonic research. And with regards to the Mutual Agreement of 1658, McBean had this to say. Whatever we choose to believe, there is no skirting around the fact that there is no primary source documentation to confirm James's initiation into a Masonic lodge. But if we disregard the fact entirely, we're still left with a less than convincing declaration of guilt with regards to his purported rank within Freemasonry. In the Mutual Agreement, James is recorded as, quote, an entered Freemason and Fellowcraft of the Lodge of Scone. Can you say which degree one would have to obtain before being recognized as a Fellowcraft? The 10th? 17th? 25th? Take a close look and find the Fellowcraft rank in this official Masonic illustration that depicts the structure of the Masonic degrees. That's correct. 31 degrees short of the accusation. The Master Mason, or 3rd degree, is the highest degree one can earn in craft Freemasonry. This is where the civilians, or cannon fodder, spend their lives within the order. One can master and obtain these degrees in a matter of weeks. Earning initiation into a Masonic lodge isn't difficult. However, gaining access to the esoteric mysteries hidden in the 30 degrees above Master Mason is another story. If a Mason so chooses to pursue these degrees, he would enter into Royal Arch Masonry. Think of these degrees as an optional continuation of craft Masonry, higher education, if you will. As the threadbare evidence we have so adequately demonstrates, Any claim about James's involvement in the mystery schools should be taken with a large helping of salt, because in the absence of concrete evidence, all that remains is wild speculation. This treatise on demonology follows a dialogue between two fictional characters, Philomaths, who is skeptical of the existence of witchcraft and takes a philosophical stance on society's lawful aspects, and Epistemon, who shapes his societal beliefs with theological reasoning. The two debate on the merits of punishing the practitioners of witchcraft in a Christian society. This genre of literary prose is called Socratic dialogue, popularized by Plato's The Republic, from which the allegory of the cave originates, and wherein Socrates discusses the topic of justice with various characters. In Demonology, a cursory glance at the preface to the reader, which was written in the first person, is enough to glean the author's attitude towards witchcraft. He himself doesn't argue the merits of witchcraft, nor does he proclaim himself a practitioner or promoter of the dark arts. In fact, he pulls no punches and wastes no time in labeling witches detestable slaves of the devil, and the practices of witchcraft assaults of Satan. There is no ambiguity in those statements. The treatise serves as an open letter to skeptics, whom he conflates with the Sadducees, and a plea to, quote, resolve the doubting hearts of many. A labor of love, no doubt. However, there is no evidence to prove that King James even wrote this. In fact, considering the conspicuous absence of the words demon, demons, and demonic in the King James Bible, the use of the word demonology is a semantic anomaly. These terms are also absent in the Geneva Bible, which allegedly preceded it. So where did these terms come from? Frankly, it's irrelevant. Either he was obsessed with the dark arts to the point of madness, as he is so often accused, or he wasn't. As occultists grow bolder in their attempts to inculcate and normalize their beliefs, and attitudes soften towards blatant satanic and Luciferian doctrines, more and more people are coming to realize that witchcraft is not only real, but ubiquitous, and that it's much less abracadabra hoodoo voodoo, and much more psychologically manipulative in nature, and thus more grounded and easily explained. And as this understanding increases, the weaker the arguments against the witch trials of the Middle Ages become. Most notably the claims that superstitious sexism was the real monster, and that the women who were accused were arbitrarily selected to satiate the bloodlust of religious zealots and subjected to barbaric and often experimental torture without a fair trial. The evidence suggests that there was, in fact, method to the supposed madness. Oh, and did I forget to point out that Demonology was reportedly written 4 years before he allegedly sold his soul to secret societies, and a full 7 years before the King James Bible was even commissioned? These rumors are always a little too convenient for his accusers, don't you think? Chew the meat and spit out the bones. Speaking of convenience, we've all read the stories about King James and his, favorites. Esme Stuart, Robert Carr, George Villiers. James is widely and unquestionably believed to have shamelessly consorted with each of these men in a sexual manner, much to the chagrin of, well, everybody. But James cared not, for he was just a frivolous and randy tyrant, or so they say. The reason why the debate about his sexuality is still limping on is due to the inconsistency of the many alleged eyewitness accounts of the king's rumored and still unproven predilection for handsome young men. We're going to quickly examine 2 of them. In an obscure tract, a man named Tom Teltroth likens James to an Ottoman sultan, a disreputable reveler, if you will, and described his alleged homoerotic desires as one of his, quote, secret sins. Not so secret that this guy wasn't privy to them, though. Yet another major convenience. They just keep piling up, don't they? Speaking of privy, in this second account, it's alleged that the Privy Council convened a meeting with the king to discuss their concerns about the nature of his relationship with Villiers. Here's his response. Do you see an admission of guilt? There's nothing strange about this statement. If you know your scripture, then you'll know that Jesus and John had a very loving and perfectly platonic friendship. Is it gay for a man to love another man? Only in this backwards, hypersexualized contemporary society of ours, I can assure you. We cannot judge our ancestors based on our severely lapsed standards. We conflate love with sexuality because we don't understand what it means to simply love our fellow man without any underlying expectation of reciprocation or reward. Jacobean society clearly did, and had no qualms about expressing their affections. If this meeting was indeed convened, then James handled it with class, approaching the veiled accusations in a straightforward manner, as befitting an upright Christian man, and left with his integrity intact. In summation, one account claims that he was secretive about his affairs, another account claims that he wasn't. Which of these two scenarios seems the most sensible? If we view these accounts from the biased perspective that we've been conditioned to adopt, then obviously we're going to disregard the second claim in favor of the first. He's as guilty as sin, and all the charges against him hold water. So let's do something radical here. Let's change perspective, then see how the evidence holds up. Basilican Doran, a treatise on political discourse, written for his son Henry, the first of his 7 legitimate children. That's correct. James was a prolific baby maker. Initially, a private kingly gift for a princely son. But by his accession to the English throne in 1603, 16,000 copies had been printed and distributed as a way to introduce himself and his ideas of kingship to his new subjects. He covered various topics from just governance to fidelity to maintaining a proper kingly diet and sleep routine. He even opened with a sonnet, within which he rather profoundly extols virtue as a vice. A tender message to a future king. Unfortunately, Henry wouldn't survive his father, but the message was clear: keep God at the center of all that you do. It's widely taught that James believed in the divine right of kings, that kingship was a divine call to action that came with an inviolable sense of Christian duty. The sonnet alone ought to vindicate James of the assaults against his character. However, he clarifies his position later in the book while listing off the crimes that a king ought to be conscience and duty-bound to never forgive. Among them, unsurprisingly, are witchcraft and sodomy. And all of this is before we even expound on how besotted James was with his wife. Following their betrothal, her ship was rerouted during a storm. Once word had reached James, he decided to cross the sea and escort her to England himself, which perfectly mirrors his famous proverb. With regards to his politics, James started, nor fought any wars. He sought to consolidate the nations, not drive them apart. He even extended an olive branch to the same theological dissidents who would eventually plot his assassination. Were these really the actions of a double-minded hypocrite? On the one hand, we have a devoted and romantic husband, a doting father, a just and dutiful ruler who favored diplomacy and showed leniency towards his enemies. A man who, for all intents and purposes, eschewed sin and conflict, maintained the stability of his kingdoms, and who very clearly wouldn't have ever considered to have engaged in any action that would have been regarded as an affront to God. And on the other hand, we have an historian's wet dream. I sincerely hope that you're picking up what I'm putting down. Whoever controls a given narrative controls the minds of those who invest in it. Perhaps the reason why James was so forthcoming in scenario 2 was because he had nothing to hide. And perhaps the facts have been twisted by his numerous and vitriolic detractors. Whatever the case may be, optics matter. Again, there's no concrete evidence that suggests that James even wrote the Basilican Doran, but authorship aside, Similar to how demonology provides an insight into the social dynamics of a heavily Christianized society, the teachings within the Basilican Doron provide an insight into the mind of a God-fearing king. And if these insights did indeed reflect James's approach to faith and kingship, they cast serious doubt on any claim of impiety. Chew the meat and spit out the bones. Lest we forget, it wasn't honorable men who plotted his assassination, but Jesuits. Real secret society men with real secrets and designs on shaping the future in their desired image. The modern world is under their thumb, and in case you've been living under a rock, this world hates King James and relishes in dragging his reputation through the dirt. Who's to say that the rumors were not inculcated by them to get us to, let's say, doubt the integrity of the King James Bible? That would certainly work out in the favor of the Catholic Church now, wouldn't it? Did you know that an annual public thanksgiving for the failure of the Gunpowder Plot was mandated in 1606 in the observance of November 5th Act 1605? And did you know that it was observed right up until its annulment in 1859? And did you know that it wasn't James whom we gave thanksgiving to, but to God? Now why would a God-fearing nation repeal that mandate and replace it with a new mandate that stated that we could no longer observe the failure of said Catholic plot, a victory that by definition belonged to God? Yet another highly sketchy and highly convenient turn of events, no? Clearly, social dynamics in the United Kingdom had changed sometime between 1606 and 1859, and we can actually pinpoint the precise moment when the shift happened. It was triggered by a man named Oliver Cromwell. Now, developing an understanding of the vendetta against King James and the authorized Holy Bible is key to understanding the condition of the modern world, but understanding the impact that Cromwell's schemes had on James' line of succession is key to understanding how we got here.